Welcome to Yerba Mate Talks.
Welcome to the Aftershow. I am Max. This is Kat. We have Dr. J there, Isa there. Hello.
Hey guys, what's up?
I'm doing awesome. How about you? All right. So we had a debate today. Is the left more violent than the right politically? Interesting premise, somewhat. But the debate. Let me get the link to the people and we can start. Before we do that, make sure to do the social thing is like, share, subscribe, send this to a friend, send this to your significant other, go to the corner, yes, the corner of your tweet, and just subscribe to Share Mate Talks. And that way we can share that for the channel. The link is there. I'll pin it and we'll get started. What did you guys think, like overview wise?
Go ahead, Isa.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It was okay. I mean, it was not. I think there was two different wavelengths going on. So, yeah. I mean, there was interesting points that kind of came up here and there, but it was not like I wouldn't say it was a grand slam. Let's put it that way.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. J.
Well, I did get the opening arguments, and for the first two and the first few arguments after that, I'm interested to hear what you guys think as far as any hope for the side voting that the liberals were more violent. I mean, every number I've ever seen is just like super clear. Like you just go by the numbers, the right's more violent. So I opening discussion or the opening arguments didn't move me at all towards that, and so unless there was something I missed in the exchange there in the debate, I'm not sure there was a lot of hope for the one side.
My big problem overall is that a lot of stats were mentioned, but we didn't get to see nothing, not one bit of anything.
Pull it up.
That is frustrating. I don't know if anyone else feels like that, but yes, pull it up is the right expression for that. Specs, what did you think? Overview.
Wow, a pretty good debate. I watched it. Yeah, I wish we could actually see those statistics of the study, but I think it was pretty good. But yeah, it's hard to argue that the left are more violent. In America, it looks like the numbers show the right is more violent, and I could also talk about history, which I'll probably get onto later, because that's not really part of the overview, but I could talk about historical movements and historical right-wing movements as well. But yeah, I'll just give that as my brief overview, and I'll get into some more substance in later.
All right. Yep. Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, now we get into the openings. Jake, and let's do the same round. Isa, you can start us off.
Well, there's something that's kind of important for me in these kind of conversations. The big important thing is defining terms. When we say left and right, what does that mean? Left of what? Right of what? Like we just kind of assume that these terms mean something. And like when I hear both of these openings, I don't know what that is. And this is the thing I always ask. I'm like, what are these terms? What do they mean? So is Marxism left? I don't know. Some people could define it that way. Some people might not define it that way. It depends on where we're standing and what we're looking at. It's interesting what a lot of people say about like the extremist circle, is that the so-called extreme right and the so-called extreme left kind of are the same thing. They're pretty much, authoritarian, dictatorial. This is the kind of the idea, with any kind of extreme. So I don't know. When I was looking at the openings, it's very much like kind of like what Dr. J said. I was not persuaded. I don't. My problem is kind of from an academic level. I need to know what I need you to define terms. Like when you're writing an academic paper, you have a thing called an abstract, and you kind of go and you kind of give very specific details. And giving data, it means nothing. And I think this is a thing that we've seen on these debates, that people are like, I'm going to give data, and then that kind of, it's a fraudulent maneuver where it makes you look like you're more intelligent than you really are. It's pseudo intellectualism, because just putting out data and statistics doesn't mean anything. How is
Yeah.
this data and statistics relevant to the arguments that are being presented? And I see a lot of people, they throw out facts and you're like, wow, they're so smart. They're right because they put out numbers. It's this weird kind of pseudo-scientism where people are like, oh, these numbers mean it's real. And I'm like, that's not how statistics and data work. When you do
Yeah,
research and stuff, you look into like liabilities of things, the liability in your research, and you have to look into all this stuff. And we did this with our debate with Daniel Hakikachu, where we looked at when he attacked Hinduism. We looked at every single point he brought up, because we don't play that game. We don't just accept what you say. We're going to research what you're going to say. So we researched every single thing he said, and they were all false. Not one thing was true that he said. Every single thing was false. Every single point was misunderstood, misused, not actually accurately what the author was saying, misrepresenting the academics. And it's trickery. It's a great type of trickery where you're not actually representing academics in a correct way. So looking at these openings, I'm not impressed by this kind of stuff because it didn't really get us to where we needed to go. So that's my feeling.
All right, thank you so much.
I'll say on
Uh,
data, data isn't an argument itself. You have to say why you're presenting it, and the data. Well, I'm not even like, even if you present data that's correct, you don't just get to present it and say, "Yo, read this." You have to say why you're presenting it and what it shows. How does it back you up? You know, you don't just
Right.
get to present a paper and go.
Yeah, Dr. J. You are muted.
Sorry about that. I'm going to go a little contrary to my panel mates here. I think the data was super important. You just say, what do the numbers say as far as like who's more violent? And you look it up, and there you go. I'm not super sure how you do it any other way, and then it seems like when you do that, it's incredibly clear what the answer is, like it's just super obvious. So I could agree, like, should we have access to this data? Should we have access? Sure, yeah. I mean, they could show it to us. They could show which studies they are. They could pull it. That all I can get on board with. But to me, it's like, if the data is like the key here, and if you agree on the data, then the answer is there. I don't quite understand. As a matter of fact, I thought Jake had to pull out some baloney. I'm going to define this in a particular way. And the reason I have to define this in the Turk way, I have to make talking political violence. You know what I mean? He seemed like he needed talking to be political violence. He had that
Right.
kind of in his intro, and he had to define it that way, because if he didn't define it that way, he didn't have a chance, because the numbers are so clear. So anyway, I
Yeah.
value the numbers. I think the numbers matter a ton. And so I think it's that. Another thing I'll disagree on the right versus left. I think in the U.S. it's become super easy to figure out right versus left. If you're right, you follow Donald Trump. That's it. That you cannot cross him. Your political career is over. I'm sure there are individuals on the internet somewhere who claim to be right but don't agree with Donald Trump. They probably exist somewhere in the world. But as far as real political power, you are on the right. You are Donald Trump. That is it. That's how it goes. You vote for him. If you want to be involved with the Republican Party at all, you don't cross him in any way. And so I think if you say him versus people that are against him, I think the lines become pretty easy in America nowadays.
But like, I would mostly agree with you, right? But can you call the people in the US like the left? It's
Well,
I'm not
I
so
think
sure.
that
In America, it's easy. You can say the left; they're not yet left in Uruguay, but I mean, this is clearly like about
Right.
America, right? We
Okay.
weren't. I don't think unless you're arguing that this debate included all the other countries in the world. I didn't get the impression they were talking about all the other countries in the
I
world.
know that was one of my doubts. Like, why did I focus so hard on
think
America?
I think to your point, Max, as well. I think we can differentiate between the Democratic Party and the left in general.
Yes.
And when we talk about the left in the U.S., those things can often be conflated. And I don't think that many people that are on the left of center, would agree to that
Not me.
conflation. I think that the Democrat Party is a center left party at most, and by the
Right.
standard, to your point, of much of the world, they're not that far left. But I do think that we do have a more extreme version of the left, or just further to the left in the U.S. But I wouldn't say that it is all that influential at this current moment.
Yeah, they have no political power. They don't vote for Democrats. I agree. They're separate. They don't vote for Democrats. They're further left, but they don't have any political power. I'm not aware that there is such a thing on the right. On the right, you vote for Donald Trump. You support Donald Trump. That's it.
Yeah, I would say that that's generally true. I mean, I know that there are like libertarians, for example, although in this last election, a lot of them voted for Trump.
Mhm.
However, I will say that in the last, this is kind of anecdotal, but I would say that in the last 6 months, the majority of those voters have now realized that they made a mistake.
Yeah, I hope that they would demonstrate that in how they vote in the midterm. But anyway, I'm kind of dominating, Max. I'll throw it back to you to go on.
Anything else, Specs, or you that you want to say about Jake's opening? He was the first one.
Can I go? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Jake, obviously, his definition of violence was so broad, he could just, like, violence, intimidation, and coercion. I wouldn't say that intimidation and coercion are violence. So I'd have to include physical acts of harm to a person or damage to a property for violence. I wouldn't even use intimidation or coercion. It's a dicky thing to do to intimidate people. I wouldn't call it violent, though.
I mean, it is, but what the problem is that gets you such a broad, like petty crimes become suddenly.
Well,
You know, it is a bad metric. I would say.
I'm curious as well if, and sorry guys, I just jumped on the panel because it's
Go.
I'm interested in, but I didn't
good.
catch the debate or the openings. But I'm curious if there was any discussion of whether rioting corresponds as political violence or not, and how you suss that out. Because to your point, when it comes to, there was a ridiculous post that I think it was Tim Pool shared on X, where he lumped all crimes occurring in Democrat jurisdictions into a bucket and said Democrat controlled crime, and then put this giant blue bar on a graph. So we can all agree that that's a ridiculous distortion, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like what we don't necessarily account for is when we have a riot, how if that qualifies as political violence or not, and how we suss that piece out. Because often riots start from the locus of a protest, and then you have provocateurs, agitators that become involved, right? And they can come from a variety of groups, and they may not even be politically motivated people. So that becomes kind of a tricky thing. I'm curious if that was discussed at all during the debate.
It was in the open discussion.
Okay.
But let's go to Brent opening, and I would kind of like to jump the gun and say, Brent, when you have those huge tech issues, you don't help your position one bit. And if you have to take like 5 minutes to go and get a pair of headphones, you do even worse for your position. So there's that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Isa.
Yeah, there was a lot of, it really was distracting in the beginning. it really, I think it just affected a lot in the beginning, just to get the whole debate started in the opening. It was very distracting. I feel I was not really swayed by his arguments. It didn't. I was not really persuaded in this situation. Um, again, I hear what Dr. J is saying, but I can't say I fully agree. I don't just think it's simple. I don't think we just know what right and left are. Even Democrat, Republican, I think there's just a lot of different factions that exist within this. And this is just the United States. This debate was not about the United States. They didn't say which is more left, the more violent than is the left more violent than the right in the United States. That was not the title of this debate. And I think that's an interesting thing, that there's a problem with United States centrism, that we just think the United States is just the center of everything. And
that is true.
And it's not. It's a person who's traveled around the world. The United States has value in its own place, but its politics are not the only thing that matters. And I think a lot of Americans really need to get out of America being just so focused upon. And it's really what even American politics are completely mixed up now. It's like more than ever. There's not really this kind of coherent narrative of who's, where people actually stand. I think I agree with what Sea Lion was saying. Sea Lion Prime was saying. I definitely don't think Democrats would be called leftists. I think a lot of Democrats.
No, you won't. They won't. They definitely won't. Like, your Democratic Party is so far right of what we call our center-left party, which is currently in office.
Me too.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I think this is my problem. It's just like, oh, Democrats mean leftists. I'm like, no. A lot of Democrats are extreme corporatists. They're very interested in military interventions. They have a lot of the same initiatives that I think Republicans have. I don't think that they're that so completely different and separate. I mean, and it's interesting. I heard Dr. J saying, well, the right means people who support DJT. I don't even think DJT is right. I think DJT is a politician who is basically just a celebrity who won office. And basically, he I don't think he's right or left. I think he's like, whatever gets me, people to give me attention, that's what I get. And so the people who are around him, yeah, they might have those particular initiatives. If Democrats were around him and Democrats elected him, then you would see Democrat policies. I think he's just kind of like, like water that goes into a cup and just fits the cup. And it's weird, like people say, I don't think that DJT has even the same values at all of like what you would call a right-wing Christian who's very much into Christianity and evangelical Christianity. I don't think he cares. My man has been with how many amorous affairs has my man had? He said it on the bus where he was like, you need to grab them by
grab them by the pussy. I'll say it.
Pussycat.
I'll say it for you.
I'm just, I'm very tremendous. Everyone's
and I just I think that was very perceptive what you said, Issa. I do think that Trump has always been an opportunist.
Exactly.
And I think that the primary defining feature of his movement is populism and identity politics. And there's a certain level of disregard of classical conservative principles, like we saw with the tariffs. I mean, when was the last time a mainstream conservative group opposed free trade in the United States, right? That is, I wouldn't call that a conservative position, but also wouldn't necessarily call it a left-wing position either. Protectionism can be practiced by either party. But when you look at MAGA as a movement, a lot of those sort of principled positions of conservatism become less important than the identity of in-group versus out-group. I think that's more so what drives it than anything else.
So I disagree. I think that Trump has some ideas that he cares about, one of which is tariffs. Everyone thinks tariffs are stupid. They're stupid. They're stupid. They're stupid. No economist ever in the history of humanity has thought tariffs were a good idea. Who's the only moron that's been pro-tariffs for the last 40 years? Donald J. Trump. He's been for them for 40 years. And when he said he was for them, what did the rest of the Republican Party do? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We like tariffs too. Yes, sir. We think tariffs are a good idea. They're not only going to somehow make it so we're going to make deals, but they're also going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. both at the same time, even though those are internally contradictory to each other. So to say he doesn't have any of his own ideas, he absolutely does. Is he willing to change them? Sure, he'll change them. He'll change this day to day to day, but there's some things he absolutely cares about. And when he decides, even if whether he's changing his mind daily or he said the same thing for the last 40 years, when he says jump, everyone else says how high. That is how the Republicans are. So when you say, are the Republicans a monolith? Absolutely, the Republicans are a monolith. As a pastor, I can tell you this. You know what you can't do when you're a pastor? Cross Trump, or you'll lose your congregation. You will lose your congregation if you cross Trump. You want to know what the morals of the Republican Party are? Don't ask your preacher. Ask Trump.
That is so interesting that it has such an incidence in people's lives. Now, for the opening of this guy, and this goes actually for both them talking about statistics and not showing one thing to us.
No presentations from both.
I'm not just talking out of my imagination, like this thing exists like a screenshot and a link where you can find the thing. No, nothing like that. That I hated that from both. And then they started talking about the numbers and the numbers while they were both of them looking at the thing, and we didn't even get to see it. It pissed me off so much.
Yeah, neither side decided to rock up with a presentation, which is always a point loser over here.
Yeah, but especially when you're talking numbers and statistics, like, dude, what? No, nothing. That made me a little bit disappointed on the debate as a whole. Any open discussion now? Isa, do you want to start?
A lot to say about that. I don't want to say it was a dumpster fire, but it was. Yeah, it had. I think Jake is, Jake the Snake. He's like that hockey player that he just comes in and he's just whacking, and he's very good at it. That team, the Andrew Wilson, they know they have that niche, the Daniel Hakikachu, that kind of niche of just aggressive, condescension, destroying the opponent. I mean, for people who like those fights in hockey, he's very good at it. He's very talented and he does that well. I was not compelled when he said the position about, he's like, what did he say? He's like, I see so much violence on the right. On the left. Where's the violence on the right? There's no violence on the right. And I was like,
that's kind of ridiculous.
How do you define what that means? Like, what are you saying? You think that so you're just like, Antifa is it? And I'm like, so what about neo-Nazis? Are neo-Nazis not right-wing? Like, do you just exclude? And I feel like he has a smart tactic. He can just say, well, whatever I don't think is right is not right. They're actually really leftist. Because, like, if you look at conservative media, I dabbled down with the Babylon Bee. I don't know if you've seen their YouTube videos. They're quite entertaining. But they believe that Nazis are leftists. Like, they think that people who believe in Planned Parenthood,
but it says socialist in the name, so they must be leftist.
Yeah.
And they see the Babylon Bee. They see the Babylon Bee, and they have evil leftist who believes in abortion and that it has LGBT, goes back in the past to get Hitler and to get Stalin. You know what I mean? They come in. And I'm just like, you're joking. You think the Planned Parenthood activist is the same as Hitler? And like, they do. Like, Babylon Bee is promoting that position, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's the same thing. I think it's a lot different, And what they do is they have these superficial values that look the same, and they say, well, they're the same thing. Look, they're the same thing, and I'm like, not quite. And people, like the attack, like the right-wing attack on leftists are these women who've been around the corner many times, I guess you could say, and have blue, green, red, and orange hair and a bunch of piercings and tattoos around. This is the idea of the vile female leftists, right? who says they're gender.
Mhm.
Don't forget that they add that they're gender fluid too, and they're like these crazy psychotic women. That's how the kind of conservative media presents them. The interesting thing is that they're like, they want to control everything, and I'm like, yeah, it's a very different kind of situation. It's not some orchestrated societal situation where you want to make a pure race, Aryan race. It's an amazing thing that there's like this conflation that's done, and I'm like, wow. Like I think that is that was fascinating. But I think what Jake was doing was in the conversation, he was like, you know, the leftists are so violent and so terrible, and right wingers don't do any of that. And I'm like, when you're a good faith debater,
I will address the. I know that Jake Hedenstrand, like I said, I don't know if he still lives here, but in Australia, we had a march where a bunch of nationalists and fascists gathered on August the 31st, and a lot of neo-Nazis showed up, and they were bashing people. They smashed up a indigenous site. They pretty much vandalized the place. Like the biggest neo-Nazi in Australia is currently in jail for violence. So for the past, the most biggest event of political violence has been from the right exclusively here in Australia. And it was the August 31st march that they had, where the neo-Nazis and the fascists gathered.
interesting. So yeah, it was just interesting to hear what Jake was saying with that particular position where he's like, the left does everything, they're so vile and bad, but the right wing is so good. And I'm like, this is a problem that I have, and it's not good faith debating. It's like when you're not accountable for what your side does and what position you're taking, you're like, well, their side is so evil and bad, but our side is good.
Yes, the best.
Yeah, you lose credibility, because I'm like, I think about the United States, and if we want to define terms, I would say that they were pretty, I guess, according to the definitions, would be considered pretty conservative, if in the sense that like the way people were supposed to dress, the way people were supposed to have facial hair, all of this kind of stuff. It was kind of regulated, like just by society de facto, like the way that you were supposed to do it. If you kind of didn't go with the grain, you would be kind of a pariah. This is just like when you think about the 1950s, which is this kind of space in the United States that's heralded as this wonderful, great time. But we don't talk about the coloreds only bathroom and the whites only bathroom and anybody who had diverging opinions. Like you're not looking at that.
Or can we add the coup d'etats in Latin America sponsored by the US?
No, we're not allowed to talk about those, Max. That's not allowed.
No one cares about those, Max. Come on now.
Damn you people.
Yeah, I mean, like we talk about right-wing violence, right? I mean, talk about Pinochet, right? I mean, and
yes,
and
Chile,
others.
they bombed the US kind of misplaced some bombs from the air, and they kind of fell on top of a very important building on Chile.
Yeah. And also, I find that especially if we want to talk about like right wing ideology, especially fascism, has an almost glorification of violence and conquest. You see, like the far right, especially fascists, they love the military. They glorify expansionism, that you need to take over either other people's lands or land that used to belong to you. So a lot of violence is ingrained in fascism. I don't think it can separate the two.
No, I don't think you can either. And in Walter Benjamin talks about that in his essay on fascism, where he defines like what fascism is, and it's a really interesting read in the context of like what we're seeing right now. And what he argues is that war is the necessary endpoint and sustainer of fascism, whether it's internal or external, in a way that I don't think is necessarily the case for authoritarian communist governments, if we define those as being left-wing extremist.
No,
communist governments tend to be repressive, but there are many communist states that are isolationist, that don't practice that same sort of the violence does become a very defining feature of fascism, for sure. I would agree.
Yep, it does seem to be such a a common denominator there. Dr. J, thoughts on the open discussion?
I did not probably watch enough of it to have any
Oh,
smart
okay.
commentary on it, but I've got to bounce. I have to listen to the rest of my chapter for my show tomorrow, and I got to put that on StreamYard and all that. So
All right.
I
You
need
got
to.
it.
Nice to see you, Dr. J. Always a pleasure.
Yep. See you
See you,
guys.
Dr. J.
And,
Good to
and
see you.
I'll be streaming
Thank
tomorrow
you.
at noon if you guys can make it. So
What are you
adios.
going to be streaming about?
I'm doing every week except for last week or a week I'm out of town. I do a stream on how to change your mind. We talk about changing your mind, and each week I do a different chapter of a book. But that's just sort of get us started. I encourage people to call in, and you can try to change my mind about something. So if you want to tell me I'm wrong that the Democratic Republican Party are the same when I think they're definitely different, you can come discuss that with me. I tend to be a little more pro-Israel. If you want to come to discuss that with
That's
me, you're
interesting.
welcome to jump on with me at that. And the point of it usually is whatever subject we're talking about isn't as much about that subject. It's always thinking about why do we change our mind? How do we change our mind? Why would I or would I not change my mind in the situation? So that's what my stream will be about tomorrow. It'll be at noon Central Time. I
Oh,
try to
yes.
do it
Right,
each
see you.
week. Yep. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
So I did want to talk about that point specifically, and I think you said it came up in the open discussion, which is classifying riots as
Oh,
either
my God.
form of
Yes.
political violence or not. So I think that it's a little bit complicated. I think that there are some cases where it's very clear that a riot constitutes political violence, like January 6th being the obvious example, where you had
Right.
a unified crowd that were all of the same political disposition, that were acting in a political way and committing acts of violence, right? And there were people that were killed as a result of that. And that to me is a pretty clear example of political violence and political violence of the right, certainly. I'm curious what examples were brought up, if there was any attempt to
Jake wouldn't shut up about the LA riots.
yeah, those, I mean, I would say those do classify, but it comes down to like a question of like, are we talking about incidents in which people are injured? I'm not aware that that was really that big of an issue. Like, and again, like when you have like a group of people, there can be any number of opportunists that show up that have nothing to do with any sort of politics, right?
Yes. For example, when the looting starts and so on.
Right.
But the truth is that even though they try to address the topic, we didn't see a single figure from Jake or from the other guy. So at one point, it becomes just a blur when they are
Right.
just,
Ships in the
and
night.
I didn't. My problem, for example, or my objection, because I saw Jake as trying to debunk some of the other things that Brett was saying, like Witsit tries to debunk scientific papers by not in them to death, right? And he was like, this objection, but none of that made sense. And since he also didn't show any of what he was appealing to, you're kind of left like, okay, I learned absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I think that there are. So if I were to make the case of riots being a form of left-wing violence, I would specifically want to look at cases where there was a specific political goal associated with those events, and especially those that were involved with any sort of like politician. I think that there are some cases like after the George Floyd killing, and I think we can all agree that that was a horrible case and that sort of police brutality should be protested. But there was a statement where Maxine Waters essentially said, we need to get more confrontational if this case isn't litigated in this way, in the context of riots that were already occurring. That starts to be more of an example of something you could point to as political violence associated with the left. And I think we've started to see more incidents that have occurred in the last 6 months than I can ever remember in my lifetime, where I would say it's fairly clear that, acts of sabotage or outright violence are occurring by left of center political actors. I don't
And
think
then-
they're representative of the Democratic Party, but I don't think it changes the general conclusion that the right is more violent. I wouldn't dispute that. But if I were going to make the case, that's the things.
Hold on.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, you have ICE like literally kidnapping American citizens for no reason from the street. Right?
Right,
right.
Can we consider that political violence on the right?
Yeah, that's not normal. We don't have a I don't know
that's a good
why.
question. Well, yeah.
That's not. Yeah, we don't have a squad of. We once had a proposal that that police could ask people randomly for immigration papers. They got rid of that in 10 hours.
Mhm.
So we don't have a squad of people that just go around looking for illegal immigrants. They usually just catch them at the airport on the way in. They go back to visit family or. Because here it's different. We have mandatory detention when you come here, which is another problem. But we don't have a squad of people going around checking immigration papers.
Yeah, that's a good question though, Max, whether that qualifies as political violence or not. I would say that since it's being endorsed by the right, I don't see a reason why it shouldn't be counted just because the state is doing it, right? And I think the distinction we want to make here is that those sorts of tactics aren't necessary to exercise their mission either. Right. So when we look at ICE, so I'm someone that believes in border enforcement. I believe that if there are people that are here illegally that have committed serious crimes or are otherwise, affecting the fabric of society, that those people should be removed. I think that a lot of the people that have shown that they have integrated and they are contributing to society, working as many of them are, that they should be allowed a chance to work through, have a some sort of amnesty process.
Yeah.
But when you look at the numbers, Barack Obama deported 2.5 million illegal aliens during his tenure, but he wasn't out there with squads of masked men, literally beating people in the streets and tackling people. Right. So that sort of violence, I think, starts to become reasonable to classify as political violence because it's not incidental to a lawful mission. It's a form of violence that's being done, I would say, as a form of intimidation to basically stop people from coming, to either self-deport or I don't know what other purpose, but I think that that's reasonable. I think that it's important to distinguish between you can do immigration enforcement. And I'm not saying Obama was perfect. I mean, there was concerns about the types of conditions and detentions. I'm sure there were cases where there was excessive use of force, but it wasn't a widespread universal thing. And we didn't have U-Hauls full of masked men doing these sorts of things, right? So even if we say that immigration enforcement is something we can do, there's no reason it has to be done in this way, I would say.
Right? It's overkill.
I think it might be a bit different in America because of just the geography. People can cross on land, whereas here we're an island, so you pretty much have to go for a port of entry. So they just check everyone. Well, a lot of people get checked. If you want to come here, you have to go through some sort of port of entry.
Right. Well, and I think that was the weakness. And again, I think it's important to understand that right now, the Trump administration is doing very serious abuses of power, and we should criticize those. I think we also need to question why they were able to get into office. There are 30 to 40% of people that I think qualify in what Dr. J was saying, that they are just kiss the ring, Trump simps, essentially, I would say, right? Where they will just do anything that Trump says and they'll go with any policy he says. But there's another 10% of people that voted for him that I think don't fall into that category and don't really support these sorts of things now. But I think a lot of the reason that they did was because of the breakdown of border security and some of the other things that we're seing. I don't know if I'm getting off topic here on the topic of political violence, but I
get what you mean on the topic of ICE is using excessive amounts of violence to achieve its goal, and it's being endorsed by the right. So I'd agree. I would categorize that as right-wing violence because it's supported by the right. They are actively supporting it. They're actively cheering it on. They are,
Now the thing is that none of this got kind of brought up. It was Jake just fixated on the LA riots, but none of the nuance of the conversation ever got brought up. and it was at the end of the day, it wasn't. It was just like Jake trying to insult the other guy and calling to question his papers, everything off camera, because we were just we didn't get to see it even once or share or have the link shared or nothing.
Yeah.
That part sucked. And then we did going a little bit Plurf mode, like cherry picking stuff, and then crying about double standards while having a double standard,
Right.
and the other guy flailing a little bit on the answers. It was bleh.
Sounds like a painful one.
It got kind of to the point of like,
Yeah.
ooh, bleh.
So I have a
Yeah.
curious question for and especially since a lot of people, I think we have two people on the panel that are international and probably maybe see things from a different perspective. But we've seen some incidents where there are specific attacks or like things that are tangential to direct violence. Like things like throwing stones at federal vehicles, ramming and blockading federal vehicles, things of that nature. Do we classify that as political violence on the left? And how do we parse that? Because I think we could agree that if a group of and again, we only have the information that we're told, but if a group of left-wing people go and attack a federal facility because they're specifically protesting ICE, then that would constitute political violence.
Yeah,
again,
I'd agree it would.
areas.
It would, but we'd have to also look at the degree of violence. Like obviously murder is worse than throwing stones.
Right.
So then we'd also look at not only the number of incidents, but the acts committed. So if like someone throws a rock and destroys a window at an ICE facility, that's obviously different to someone,
Sure.
I don't know, going into an ICE facility to shoot an ICE agent.
Right.
But let's say like a protest. The thing is that a protest, let's say, for example, here, if you burn a couple of tires, inconvenience a street, I mean, you could say that it's violence, but that's very mild compared to
it's mild violence compared to what that's
some
saying,
other stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you had to take a detour. Oh, how terrible, right?
I think there's also
We don't.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Max.
We don't consider that like if you do what do you call it? We call that piquete. If you do like a picket kind of a thing and you cut a street and you inconvenience some people, well, that's the price of you
That's
being
not
able
violent,
to protest.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we have that here. Like we have pro-Palestine marches every weekend. They had one over the Harbour Bridge. That was usually they're pre-approved by police. They block off some roads, but they usually do them in the city anyway, where not too many people drive because
Yeah.
the only one they blocked off was the entirety of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. They had a pro-Palestine march. That one, but it's usually pre-approved, and I wouldn't call that violent to block off a street,
No.
even if it's done without the consent of the police. You have to prove some damage to property. I'd say, like I said, my criteria of violence is damage to property, damage to property, or harm to persons. I think those have to be the two. I don't care that you had to take a detour. That's not violence.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mr. Eman says the most recent federal election was actually influenced by America electing Trump. They moved away from any politician supporting Trump.
Mr. Eman, can you just put in the chat which country you're talking about?
Yeah, I was confused as to which country as well.
Yeah, can you just put in the chat? Yeah, I just want the country.
And the other thing that I maybe wanted to talk about, which is a stickier issue as well, but Bill Mayer did an excellent job on his show of this, and I know a lot of.
He's talking about my country, Australia. Yes, that's right. We had a party called the Trumpet of Patriots that was trying to run on Trump-like policies, and they got absolutely smashed. We had the Liberals were also kind of running towards Trump. They wanted a Doge type of situation. Gina Reinhart, who's bigger. So the opposition leader lost his seat. Yeah, the centre-left party won in, I think, 90 seats. It was an absolute demolishing for the right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So one thing I did want to maybe raise, and let me know again, Max, if I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but I think there's been a lot of something I think is deeply problematic as well that's happening right now, where when a random person who obviously is often, clearly severely mentally ill, and, is doing one of these acts of individual violence, it's now labeled as like part of this like overwhelming trend of violence on either side.
Right.
And a lot of the time, those people might have some political views, but it's not necessarily clear that they are really acting in a way that's considered political violence either. And I think that's important to bring up because in the Charlie Kirk shooting, right, whether or not he had a personal political view as to why he committed that violence, it becomes
was
a lot
just
harder to point
real wacko.
Yeah, he's kind of just and the thing is that the way the Trump administration and a lot of people on the right portrayed it was that this was like he had been like a card carrying member of a Democrat extremist organization or something,
Right.
And I think that's important to call out as well, that we're seeing this like worrying trend where it's these sorts of events are happening, but they're within the context of we already see random acts of violence that are far worse than that don't get labeled political violence on a near weekly basis in the US, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that part of things.
Yeah, Jake kind of discussed or made reference to the topic of the left. He kept repeating over and over, oh, the left is only doing narratives and lying and so on. It was very weird and witted like. But it is kind of both sides are always, having their own narratives when it comes to the violence. But we didn't hear any of that like directly addressed during the debate, like, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, sounds like there wasn't. It sounded like it was a very much on Jake's side.
Snooze fest.
Yeah. But I'm curious, if anyone else has any thoughts there. Like, how do we classify those sorts of lone wolf events, and how do we parse out whether they are considered a form of political violence or not, or does it even matter?
So
yes, we can. I'd say it'd be very hard. So I think we don't want to classify them until. But if there's a clear indication, like they have a manifesto and it aligns with left wing or with a right wing ideology, we can classify it then. But otherwise, not really. Like.
So what I think is interesting about all of this is that you're dealing with people who are not mentally well. A lot of these lone wolves are people who really need help. They need help. And it's interesting that we're like, oh, it's a political thing. I'm like, no, these people are not well. Like Dylan Roof, all of these people that do crazy, horrible things, these are not mentally sound people. And they writing documents, and if you read them, they're crazy. They're not like normally thought out things. It's all it has juxtaposition of all kinds, and that's with all kinds of madness. And you can tell because people who have like a kind of a standard disposition are not going to do violent acts. That's called a lone defier. So when you're a lone defier and you don't follow the rules of society, like Dylan Klebold and Harris, Eric Harris, when we see these types of people, these are people that are not operating on a normal wavelength, on a standard wavelength, because people who operate on a standard wavelength want to preserve their own life. That's why it's called social contract theory. So what you're doing is you follow the rules of society because you want to preserve yourself. It can be very selfish, but that's the thing. You want to preserve yourself. So you don't do crazy things because you don't want to put your own life at risk, So it's wild to, like where people are like, oh, this is all about politics and stuff. I'm like, it's about people who aren't well. And, you have like celebrities who are pretty neutral in a lot of ways, like at least in the past. And you have these fans that go and attack them. You have fans that attack them. You know what I mean? And why did they do it? It's because they're not well. And I think that's a lot of the cases of these killings. You're dealing with very psychotic, unhealthy people. So
totally. Yeah, I agree with all of that as well. I think that one thing I wanted to mention that I think should be said is we've seen, and this isn't just a left wing thing either, like we've seen some level of endorsement or celebration of these acts, even if the person who did it wasn't following an explicit political motive, but they attacked a certain political figure. So Nancy Pelosi's husband is a great example when he got beat up by that crazed person with the hammer, right?
I remember that, yes.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
all these right-wing people that were making, bad jokes and making light of the situation. I think Trump even explicitly
Oh
was
yeah, that was when they said that he was that he was attacked by his gay lover or something. I remember that.
yeah, it was just insanity. And I think that we unfortunately saw some of that on the left with the Kirk assassination. And I can say I understand why. I think we also, when it comes to Kirk specifically, I think it's important not to buy into this framing that he was some sort of unifying figure, because I think the truth is that he was quite radical and deliberately divisive.
Yeah, he
Generally.
was like he was deliberately divisive. I remember his titles used to be like "liberal gets destroyed"
Right,
in college debate. And he used to, like,
I understand, but then are you going to count on like those stats comedians? Because comedians will be making
No.
what is the statute of
No,
limitations?
that's a good point. I'm not saying that these are incidents of violence, but I think that it contributes to a violent atmosphere in politics that is growing, that is making these sorts of attacks more likely. I think that we've had sort of like the Overton window shift in a lot of ways. And I think if you trace it back, a lot of it does go back to like the Obama years and the Tea Party movement and some of the stuff that was happening around that time, where we saw like marches with like nooses and things like that. Like there was a time in American politics where if you made any comment like that, you would likely get a visit from the Secret Service, right? And now I think that there's a lot more of sort of celebration of violence and thinking that it would be okay. Like I didn't want, I wouldn't kill Kirk, but people are often saying, like, people in my family have said similar things, that like it was a good thing that he was killed. I was recently at a club in downtown Denver, and there was like prominently displayed a painting of Trump with a target on his head and like blood everywhere. I think that that's
not
troubling, right? I don't think it counts.
Yeah, that's
as
not normal.
but
That ain't normal.
that
Just so you know.
it's pointing to our democracy becoming increasingly fragile, and I think it's something we need to reckon with, because and again, I think it's very hypocritical when the right-wing people are saying like, oh, well, I mean, they're rightly calling people out for celebrating Kirk's death, but you had Mike Lee tweeting out, what did he say, "Nightmare on Wall Street," when the that Minnesota lawmaker was shot and killed. Like it's just it's deeply disturbing.
Their entire family was killed. Yeah, and I think that was Mike Lee.
The normalization of the it's the reality show station of politics. It's kind of gross. You see it because we're focused. I don't know why the conversation was so hardly focused on the US, because Jake is Australian, so it was weird to me that it didn't go to other parts of the world. But for example, you look at Argentina's president, and he's basically a South American emulation of Trump. Went around doing appearances and events with a chainsaw to cut down on the socialist scourge, on the leftist scourge, and so on. And gifted Musk gifted Musk a chainsaw on an event also, not like completely wacko South American version of Trump.
I remember when he was running, he's the Javier Milei. Yeah, he was.
Yes, whack job. The other day he was singing in a. So.
How was he singing?
The left, but then you have, for example, the left in my country. We are heavily democratic. We don't like it's a new kind of left. So you have the historical, and you can take a look at the left in Europe. A lot of the violence on the left in other sides have kind of stop being advocated in
Yeah,
other
yeah.
parts of the world other than the
Like,
US.
yeah, like I said, it's right wingers that were more violent, especially this year, these past few years, was for right wingers and sovereign citizens, almost exclusively here.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think it's really important that we don't equivocate, right? So if I call out an incident of left-wing violence, I think it's just because it's important to talk about the culture of violence and what we're seeing in the U.S. But it should never be that. I don't think that there's a case to equivocate the two sides at all. I mean, we didn't see, I mean, imagine if we had seen Antifa get together. I mean, there's not even that many of them, but all of Antifa got together and did a January 6th style event. We haven't seen anything like that, right?
Right.
We've seen, attacks in like these obstruction protests around federal facilities, and some of the actions are explicitly violent, and some of the actions border on violence. But I don't think it's fair to equivocate the two sides, and we have a very long history in the U.S. I mean, in the U.S., we have some history of leftist violence in terms of like anarchists back in the early 20th century. But if we look at the history of political violence in the U.S., a lot of it comes from this nativist, deeply racist, white supremacist movement. And you could say, well, they're not right wing, but who are they associated with typically, right? Is conservative groups. And, we have groups like, and when you look at like the history as well, like the militia movement in the 90s was like a renaissance of political violence. And that was all deeply right wing, whether it was pro-government or not. It was, by any standard, right-wing violence. And we look at things like the Oklahoma City bombing and the assassination of Alan Berg, who was a left-wing radio host. Like, I think that it's worrying to me, but understandable, that we're seeing in the last 6 months, I would say, a wave of almost like retaliatory violence from some people on the left. And we do have some figures, not in the Democrat Party per se, but on the far left endorsing that kind of violence. And I think that that's something that we should call out. But again, it's like, to your point, Max, like we have agents.
What do you mean on the far left in the US?
Yeah, so I'm talking specifically, when I say far left, I mean people that do not believe in liberal democracy and believe in more Marxist style politics, that believe that you have to act in ways that are outside of the normal methods of democracy, or if you do use the normal methods of democracy, it's in service of a more extreme form of government. I don't think it's a very large group, but I think it is significant. And I specifically associate that with people like Hassan Piker, for example, is the one on Twitch. And I hate to bring that guy up because in general, he's just an asshole, right? But he was at an event where he spoke, and I'm not sure the nature of the event, but he had spoken and basically said that, mentioning death threats that were made against a director of ICE and saying, oh, well, he stepped down. See, it worked. You know what I mean? And
God.
so that kind of thing is problematic, right?
But
I think
but isn't it he like a clickbaiter?
He
Like,
is.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that it's important to point to the fact that that there are certain platforms that are allowing that kind of speech. And if you go to a platform like Reddit, there's tons and tons of advocation of violence. Like I've never seen anything like it up in the last 6 months. So it's again, small percentage of people, but when I say far left, that's who I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Iban says, I feel that it's more about the focus on the media on extremism. I don't think that the society has changed that much. People very rarely change.
Yeah, especially here. I don't know. Kind of. I don't know. I think in the States it's debate that, but over here it's kind of true. But we are seeing a rise in.
I think that's a good point, but I think that people don't change, but circumstances do. And I think that the issue that's not talked about that is so radicalizing on both sides in the US, like the thing I always say to people is, okay, well, you can say that MAGA is a movement that maybe is predicated on a nativist and racist identity, right? Identity politic. But why is that appealing? in a way that it wasn't necessarily appealing earlier. And I think a lot of it comes down to economic and social conditions that make it easy for a politician like Trump to point the finger at the other and blame them unfairly for all of the ills. And so, for example, in the US, when we look at the metrics of how the working class is doing, it's not pretty, right? Since 1973, wages have not increased for the working class in real terms, and costs have increased. And I think that tends to have a radicalizing effect, because when people are able to live a productive, fulfilling life in society, they're less likely to engage in these sorts of extremist movements.
Right.
When
I
that
generally
breaks
agree with
down,
that.
right? And I think that's something that we really need to reckon with as a country in the US, is that, yes, we've had this spectacular GDP growth and stock growth, but where has it gone? It hasn't been evenly distributed, right? So maybe a country like Norway hasn't seen the same level of extreme growth in the economy and stock market, but it's been much more evenly distributed across the population to where wages have kept up with that level of growth. In the US, they simply haven't. We were told that, things would trickle down, and that simply hasn't been the case. So I think that
yes, that is the loveliest myth of capitalism. It happens everywhere.
So
There are a lot of factors in this political violence. I don't think that taking the shock jocks on either side as the common denominator, I don't think that is the best metric, because you will have people on the left saying that all gay people should be put in deconversion camps or crazy stuff like that. But it only really becomes a problem when they are, or they're near having the means to do it. The discourse itself, yeah, sure, it's hateful, whatever, but can you really consider it like political violence on itself?
Max,
I don't know.
that comment by Robert Webster I'm just looking at is very interesting.
As a resident of Kentucky, these people have always existed. Trump just gave them permission to be openly proud of their bigotry. Interesting. That seems to be also a heavy component. You were talking about Trump. On the latest Destiny versus 5 debate on MTV, there was someone arguing for the Trump side that was Mexican as fuck, because he even had a straw hat with Oaxaca tequila, right? And he was arguing for the Trump position, something that doesn't make sense at all.
It was like the that many versus 20 debate was two of the people were immigrants.
Quite frankly, I'm sorry.
We actually reviewed that, so
I watched you guys review it.
That was a great video.
Review, but we're plugging our other episodes, so go watch our episodes. But
go watch them.
Yes, thank you.
But it still doesn't make sense to me. Dude, Trump does Mexico.
But I think I can shed some light on that, where I think that they are responding to this aesthetic and this idea of you're part of the good group of Americans. You're part of the good group of immigrants. You're not part of this.
You're one of the. Yeah, they think that they're one of the good ones, that they're going to be allowed to stay. But it's when they've got rid of the so-called bad immigrants, you're next. They're not going to stop. These people,
and Stephen Miller,
they are hungry for power and control. They're not going to stop when they're done getting rid of the bad immigrants. They're going for the next group, and that's going to be the good immigrants.
Do you know what's interesting, though? Because I come from this kind of immigrant culture myself in the United States. My folks come from other countries. So it's interesting because, particularly in the South Asian space, there's this kind of what we call the crabs in the barrel in certain spaces, where it's you get out of poverty, you get out of suffering, and then you don't want to help other people out. It's a pretty terrible, vile kind of situation, and it's a part of the mentality. It's like I made
Uh-huh.
it really successful. Too bad, too sad for you. You know,
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
once
it's kind of
I once
treacherous.
Hold
yeah
on,
I
Spence.
once heard an Indian guy in Australia, a comedian named Neil Karhatka, talk about this, that immigrants, and if you can correct me because obviously I'm not South Asian, but it's about that immigrants, that South Asian people like Indians, they're not necessarily self-centered, but they're more family-centered. So if their family's fine, they generally won't be like at like demonstrations and stuff. That's what
And
I
I
heard,
think
but I
that
might be wrong.
I don't know if this is just like inertia where it carried over, but again, when we look at like who was the coalition that brought Trump to, I would say, an easy victory, because we have to remember that Biden versus Trump was very close to the extent that there
Yeah,
were
yeah,
all
yeah.
these ridiculous lawsuits. And I remember just like for weeks being like, can they just freaking figure it out? Like, we still don't know. But like on this time, it was like by the next day, it was in the bag. And I think
It was, yeah, it took around 2
very,
days from
Hold
election
on,
day.
let's
Yeah.
Isa, do you want to finish
oh, I'm
that
sorry, I
thought?
didn't mean to interrupt you.
I thank you, appreciate it. Well, no, I'm glad. So whenever I bring up points, there's lots of conversation. So whatever I'm saying is stimulating folks to talk.
Yeah.
So I'm not complaining. It's a good thing, you know. I'm patient. I can wait. Yeah, I just think it's an interesting thing looking at immigrant culture, that you're like, I'm successful, I made it. Too bad, too sad for you. Um,
Yeah.
I think when you were talking about like the Hispanic culture, it is very sad. You see certain folks who are like, I want to be white. I am doing social mobility. But but I also want to have this connection to my heritage and culture, but I also want to be white. It's like this weird
Mhm.
cognitive dissonance. So that person that you brought, I think there's a cognitive dissonance going on where it's like, I want to aesthetically be connected to this culture, but I don't really want to be deeply connected by what the plight and all of these other things. You know what I mean? So I have this aesthetic connection, but I actually am also interested in whiteness and being connected with the greater community of white Americans. It's kind of a tragedy. It's a tragedy.
I mean, because you can't. Number one, you can't change. Like, if you're Latino, you won't be white. You can try to incorporate as much as you can, but to the hardcore racist, you are
Yeah,
still that, right?
And you know what's
And
fascinating?
even if you I agree, you get granted the position, you can't have both. You can't keep to your roots and also be fully assimilated. It's like, oh, I only do. I'm a white person now.
Right.
You know what's fascinating with, because there was a case in the United States. A lot of people don't really realize how bigoted the United States was, but there was a thing called the Loving case, Loving versus Virginia, right? So people who are, and I'm a person of multicultural heritage. If you're Hispanic, you're of multicultural heritage too. A
Well,
lot of
yeah.
people are of multicultural heritage, and they should be happy to own this. And I would argue that people of European ancestry are of multicultural heritage too. But there was a case of the Loving versus Virginia case. And in this case, the argument was that this man, Loving, he was a man of European ancestry, and he married an African American woman or a woman of African ancestry. And they said this is illegal. This is illegal in Virginia. You can't, like for us, we're like, that's so stupid. What do you mean you can't marry? If you want to, if there's somebody you like, why can't you be with that person? It's so dumb. You would think it's such a ridiculous idea now that you would actually have laws against this. But they
Right.
actually try to make arguments from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew scriptures, to say that. And they're trying to use the argument of the Midianites. And I'm like, sir, fellow European folks, you do realize that you're the goyim, like you're not the chosen people. But that's the thing, because a lot of these people of European ancestry who became Christians felt that they were the Jews. They were the new Jews, right? So the Jews,
Right.
other Jews are cursed because they didn't follow Jesus, and somehow these European folks did follow Jesus. I'm not sure how, but they believed that they did. So they said, we are following Jesus, and so we're now the chosen people. We're the chosen people. We're what the Lord's talking about. They're talking about us. We're the actual Jews. And it's so funny because they're not, but they believe that they were. So it's this mythology. So they believe they're these pure Jewish people. This is the idea. So they think the Torah is talking about them. So they quote the Torah and say, well, the Tanakh, or they call it the Old Testament. The Old Testament states that the Jews could not marry the Midianites. But the argument of the text, if you're actually interested in law, which they were not, the precedent argument had nothing to do with them being Midianites. What the Torah's problem were that these Midianite, or these other ethnic groups, did not worship the true God. This is the problem. The problem wasn't their ethnic identity. Their problem was that they were worshiping the false deities. And that was the thing. So Israelites could not convert with these other non-believing women, not because of their skin type, but because they didn't worship the true God. But these European people quoted this type of thing. These people of European ancestry were like, this is the case, and it's an abomination if you marry people of color. Like, if you marry these people who are African or Native American, you can't marry them because it's unnatural. And I'm like, gentlemen, if I was the lawyer in this case, and this is why they were separated. They were put in jail. The woman was put in jail longer because she was obviously African American, so this was unacceptable, But the thing was so ridiculous because I'm like, if I was the defense, and of course the defense attorneys were Jewish, so the Jewish attorneys were defending this because a lot of Jewish attorneys fought against these civil rights infractions, and these oppressions, just all these kind of horrible injustices. So a lot of the Jewish lawyers went into that, particularly in civil rights. So what happened was, they were saying it's unnatural, it's an abomination. If I was an attorney in that case, I'd be like, excuse me, who here is a pure anything? I would challenge this so-called European ancestral identity. I'm like, you're a hodgepodge of multiple ethnic identities. You're French, you're German, you're English. You are a bunch of ethnic identities. You're not pure, so your argumentation of purity is false. And in fact, I can take the Norman-Saxon Wars, which already proved that these European identities are not actually unique and perfected. But this is the funny thing. Like, you hear this person saying, well, we believe in whiteness. We believe in Christianity. Like, this is a part of this idea of conservatism and right-wing stuff. And I'm like, the whole thing is a fraudulent narrative. All of it's constructed. And it's also stolen valor. They're stealing Jewish stories and stealing the Jewish narrative in order to propagate their own superiority. But it's not their story. They don't even know what their story is. I was actually in this club called Pagan Club, right? Because I wanted to learn about European traditions. It's like my family lived in Europe, right? My mom's family did. They lived in Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, and these places, and they were second-class citizens there. So they lived as second-class citizens in Eastern Europe. It was a pretty horrible experience. There was these things called pogroms where they abused them, and they lived horrible, difficult lives, but they were able to escape to the United States. My family were basically refugees into the United States after the pogroms. But basically, when we look at this kind of story of stolen valor, they're like, we steal these stories. We don't. And I was in Pagan Club, and I was like, what are these ancient European traditions? There's not a lot. You have the Hellenistic stuff, which is Greek, which is more Mediterranean. It's not even your like classical, English European tradition. And then I looked into like Arthurian legend, and I looked into these other things. And what they did is they did some kind of trickery with it. They had ancient traditions that didn't really have the Christian stuff, and then they tried to import it in. They tried to make the Holy Grail the cup that Jesus drank from. They took these ancient indigenous European things and then tried to thrust this kind of European Christian stuff onto it. And it's tragic. It's like a tragic theft of European ancestry and culture. Like, and I don't hear people talking about it. I'm like, but your culture has been like, it's been raped. Like, you don't even know what your own ancestry and your own culture is. It's been so destroyed and so, forced into this other like imperialistic, colonialistic narrative that you don't even know what your own ancestral stories are. And I went to Ireland, so I was reading these Irish stories, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. They have this indigenous Irish culture, and then they have to throw this Christian stuff into it to make it so it's a valid story. The story can't stand on its own without the European Christian narrative. And I'm like, it was tragic. It's like a tragedy to me. And I remember seeing this movie called Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like a weird aberration from the Halloween series, but they try to kind of go into the Celtic mythology. But the thing is, they try to make it evil. Like, it's an evil thing. Like, Christianity is good. Ancient Celts are evil. Samhain is this thing where there's a festival of blood and sacrifice, right? But that's
Yes.
not really what Samhain was, and that was a lie that these kind of European Christian imperialists and colonialists did, where they came in and they destroyed the Irish tradition. And I
Those
want
are
to recommend Watch Sinners, huh?
So those are the feel good tales, like for example, the Spanish tell themselves of what they did down here in South America. But like if you go far enough back, you have so many hundreds more years of the right or the conservatives being in power that it's not even close. And that's kind of the other thing that I wanted to touch on. That if you go far back, because the right has been around way more than the left. The left can never catch up unless they really start putting some effort into killing some motherfuckers.
I hear you. It's heavy. I wanted to make a plug. I recommend that everyone watch the movie Sinners. The villain in the movie is an Irish character, but it's such a powerful figure because he shows about the kind of European Christian colonialist position that kind of destroyed his own culture, and how the thing is like the Lord's Prayer came in and it was used as a weapon against the people. And I think, and I'm against all the colonialism. I'm not for Islamic colonialism either. I mean, I think there was a lot of damage that's happened from that too, where there's a lot of cultural erasure that's happened where people have been Arabized. I'm not going to deny that. That's the same thing. Europeans have been Christianized, and Arabs, people in Africa and in the Middle East have been Arabized, and it's extremely problematic. I think people should be able to have their own identities, and they shouldn't be erased. I'm against erasure, so
Mm-hmm.
No, and that's a really good point that you brought up there, Isa, is that this idea of whiteness itself is treated as something that arises out of like natural order, like there were the white peoples of the earth. But could you, like, for us, like, because you touched on some of this, but when does that idea originate? As someone that studied the history, like, when does this common understanding of an idea of whiteness, instead of being British versus Norman, or, I mean, the French and the British have hated each other as much as any groups hated anyone in the history of the world at some point in time. But now we're supposed to believe that they're part of a common brotherhood. And I'm curious where that comes from.
Hey, CK. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think it's really just one place in history. I think it's kind of a composite of multiple events that occur. Definitely, I think we see whiteness really popping up when the enslavement of human beings starts to arise, because you need to make a distinguishment where there were people who are disenfranchised people of European ancestry, and then there were people who are wealthy. It was a great technique to get people who were impoverished of European ancestry to kind of fall in line, right? And say, yeah, we're not benefiting from this, but the idea of us being white allows us special privilege because of our whiteness. So I think, yeah, even if we look at the time of Jesus, these people didn't have any concept of that. It was more like, where did you come from? Did you come from?
What's your like ethnic heritage? Because
where's your region?
The commandment is for if you have Hebrew slaves, those get one treatment. If you have other types of slaves from the people around that were non-Jews, that's a different story.
But you're talking specifically about the arising of chattel slavery tied to colonialism and the exploitation of Africa. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And that also has a biblical, the curse of Ham, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it I think that was it the mark of Cain? Like why the Mormons refused to accept black people? Was because they had the mark of Cain? Or is that something else?
No, it's the curse of Ham that sees Noah naked and gets cursed to have darker skin.
Yeah. It says burnt skin. That's what the text actually says. And burnt could be different things. If you have a 3rd-degree burn, your skin could become actually white.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's really hilarious because they're assuming that the term burnt means black. So, I mean, like, it doesn't have to be. And it could be also, if you said it's burnt, maybe it's a texture. It could be your skin has a certain kind of texture, because when your skin gets burned, particularly like your superficial skin gets burned, the texture of your skin changes, and there's scars, and the scarification. There's all of these different things. But the thing is, these people, I think, even with religion and text, they're just so limited in their scope. So when they look at it, they're like, well, the text means what it means. And it's interesting, like when I was listening to Dr. J, I think Dr. J made a lot of really good points. And there was something that I was like, I'm a little curious about this, because you're like, well, if someone follows Trump, they're conservative. And I'm like, I don't know. For me, I was like, I don't resonate with that, because I think a lot of people follow Trump for different reasons. Some people want to be on the bandwagon. I don't think it's because they're quote unquote conservative. They're like, oh, he's this guy who's a celebrity. I'm interested in being connected to people with power and celebrity. He's charismatic. He's charming in his own way. If you're into that kind of charisma and charm, he has his own kind of, that's why he had his show, The Apprentice, was extremely popular. You know what I mean? He's like, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. And he keeps saying that, and all the people, and they're all wanting to watch. And it's so terrible. It's so horrible. You watch the show, and these poor people are suffering, and he's like, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. And it's like, I mean, it's like a total joke, but people are into that, because people love reality TV. I was a teacher, and I was talking to reality TV. I was talking to my students, and I was like, what do you think about reality TV? And they're like, we all love it. And I'm like, but it's so mean. It's so condescending. You watch Keeping Up with I don't know if you watch a lot of reality TV, like Survivor, Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
No, not to say I do. I definitely don't watch that.
But I understand the concept. And I did say not too long ago,
Big Brother, Jersey Shore. They're very mean. They're not like nice, empathetic, compassionate people. They're very nasty and mean to their colleagues, and people love that. They like the meanness, and they get attached to that. And I think Trump was really good at that. Being mean he's really good at being mean. And people are like, oh man, I love this meanness. And I think there's a core in the United States. There's a little bit of sadisticness that we have in our culture here. There's a level of sadisticness where people they're attracted to it. They're attracted to this mean, sadistic nature, and it's sad and it's tragic. But I think I can see why people do it. There's an appeal. There's an appeal of it's taboo, because we come from this hyper conservative culture that everything's wrong. The Max Weber is the Protestant ethic, where we have to not talk about religion, not talk about politics. Everything's perfect. We got to wear our suit and tie, no facial hair, nice, clean, cropped hair. You got to be just perfect, 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 right? And there's a bit of rebellion to that. So then people we want to, the pendulum has swung. And I think, like when we saw the politics, everyone's so clean cut, and they talk so well, and everything's so well produced. It's all well produced. Everything just seems like it's right and correct. He's like, I'm violating all of these rules. I don't care what you think. I'm just going to talk the way I talk. I'm going to act the way that I act. And it blew politics away. He broke the glass ceiling. And people can say anything about Trump, but he did. He broke the glass ceiling of American politics, because it's not the same anymore. It won't be the same. What he did is he's like, I'm not going to do any conventional rules. I'm going to mudsling. I'm not going to be proper. I'm not going to do any of that. And people are like, whoa, this is amazing. What is this? Who is this? You know what I mean? And, the Democrats didn't get with the program, but that's why
Yeah. So no, that's a really good point. And I think that it's worthy of bringing up, is to I don't think a lot of people saw it coming, because they didn't realize how much of politics was that sort of show, right? And when Trump came onto the debate stage with 10 other GOP candidates on stage, I mean, he said things that that had never been said in a debate before. I mean, he's talking about how, Ted Cruz's wife is ugly, and Jeb Bush is like, you got to be tough for politics. He's like, oh yeah, you're a tough guy, Jeb. You know what I mean? And he develops this star persona that people attract to. I do think that the other piece that needs to be said, and it's maybe like a stupid association, but people think of the private sector and government as different. So this person coming from the private sector, I think they still believe that he can do something different, and he can be this force against the government, because, hey, he's only a billionaire. He's not but I mean, obviously I think that's He's still part of the elite class. So that argument is, but it kind of goes to what Benjamin said, which was that, and I don't think that MAGA is a fascist movement, but I think that it is adjacent to that. And Benjamin talks about fascism as being the aesthetization of politics, meaning that rather than having explicit, codified, sacred political positions, those become less important than the aesthetic of the nation. And you become very untethered in the sorts of policies that can be proposed because it's really just about preserving that racial and national aesthetic. And I think that's part of what Trump has been successful at doing, is that he takes people that are from disaffected regions in the US, like the deindustrialized Rust Belt, for example, where Hillary Clinton lost a lot of voters she wasn't expecting to lose, or especially in the Deep South, people that are not well off. They shouldn't necessarily support a billionaire, but he's able to communicate to them this sort of like aesthetic identity that gives them what Benjamin calls is the right to, rather than giving them a right to change property relations, because he was a Marxist, he says that fascism gives them a right to participate and express themselves. And I think that's why, you know, when you look at it, you say, okay, well, to a person that is like rational, you look at Trump and you say, he's not a working class hero. He's not, but a lot of people see him that way because he's giving them the right to participate, right? And the right to be part of this aesthetic. And I think Benjamin was very correct in that, even if I don't agree with Marxism.
Which Benjamin?
Walter Benjamin. He
Oh,
was
no
a Marxist, post-colonial author, and this is the paper I'm quoting is called the Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. He actually died. He committed suicide. He was about to be deported from France back to Nazi Germany. So he was a victim of fascism, and so he tries to define in this paper what it means. He defines fascism as a movement that arises because of mass media, which is partly what we're talking about. And
Right.
He also talks about this overriding aesthetic. And when you talk about Make America Great Again and how, you know, someone like a Mexican can get caught up in something that doesn't really make sense on a political and individual basis, it's this aesthetic is very powerful. And this idea of being able to participate in a group identity that taps into your belief that your correct belief that you're being screwed by the system, but rather than changing those material conditions, you know, whatever method, and we can disagree politically, but Trump is not changing those material conditions in the favor of the working class in any way that
right.
but
the funny
he
thing,
draws them in.
the funny thing is that it's not that this guy was a little bit Latino. No. I'm a little bit Latino.
Yeah.
Right?
And I am too, yeah.
This guy is just, the best way to describe it is Mexican as fuck.
Yeah, that's
And
really interesting.
I was flabbergasted. And then we also had our friend Matthew Hakim, which I haven't finished watching that series, but I have scanned, and Matthew Hakim hasn't appeared in any other. So he probably did very, very bad.
Matthew Hakim's the guy who put the wire on the TV and said, "Look, it's flat."
Yeah, Matthew. It's always a pleasure.
Even Barclay's face when he said that was funny.
I don't think there's much else we can talk about the debate. And I actually need to go finish up some questions for the interview that I have tomorrow with Rusted Soul. And she's a flat earther. She's a flat earther. And wait.
Oh my God, I know who Rusted Soul is, so I'm dying. I'm sorry, I gotta go on.
She is a flat earther, and we bonded over our mutual bashing of Witsit. So it's going to be funny. It's going to be fun as hell.
Rusted Soul is a lot of fun. Like,
she's so great. I love her.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. When you said her name, I just thought about all the memes. She has this great meme called where she made it's like the never ending grift, and it has like Witsit and Dave Weiss, and like it's perfect.
Yeah, she doesn't like grifters at all, and we kind of bonded a little bit.
Don't.
we were reviewing one of her videos and she dropped by and she couldn't hop on stream then, but we arranged we're talking tomorrow and that will surely be
Yeah,
fun.
it's at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time.
Cool.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if that is even real, but okay. But yes, we have that already scheduled. There's another debate on Friday.
Oh yeah, Saturday
And
morning, come get it. Michael Jones is going to be there. Oh, I'm there for
yes.
that.
I don't like him. He's going to just throw a bunch of papers he hasn't read, and we're not going to get to see them. It's just so lazy.
Who's he debating again? Who's he debating?
Mike Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, and Dan Baker.
Dan Baker. I've heard the name, but I don't think I've ever seen.
No, Barker. Woof woof. Barker,
What?
not
I
Baker.
don't know who he-
Yeah. So
I
we'll
think
have that.
I've heard the name. I've heard the name Dan Barker. It rings a bell, but I don't really know.
Well, Dan. To me, it doesn't ring any bells actually. Or no, Clive Barker. Never mind. I was thinking of someone else. So yeah, we're going to have that, and we'll see where we go from there.
All right, so-
Let's do final thoughts, and we'll be on our way. Isa, want to start?
I think he may have stepped away.
He may have gone, yeah, or
All right.
fallen asleep.
Do you want to go?
He said
That
BRB.
usually happens. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I just thought this was a really great discussion. I really enjoyed Isa's contributions today, especially around like some of the historical contradictions in the nature of like this nationalist white identity and where it comes from. And I hadn't really been exposed to those arguments before as Isa had put them. So I very much appreciated that. And I guess from my side, I would just say that I think that it's pretty clear universally that we shouldn't equivocate the two sides here. They are not the same. And when it comes to violence and their use of violence, they are not the same. I do think that there is a worrying trend of increasing violence with a small group on what I would call the far left. And I think that that's something to be worried about, because I think in the end that ends up benefiting authoritarian right-wing movements more than it hurts them. So I think that that's why that's important to me.
Because of the backlash, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
And so I think that's something to be concerned of, but I think it occurs in this greater context of radicalization in American politics, which has a lot of causes. But for me, like I said, I think one of the big ones is economic and social. And I think that as long as we don't fix those root social economic causes that are causing so much of the country to be disenfranchised, unfortunately, we're probably going to see more radicalization in the future. So I would like that to be changed in the US, even if I don't know how.
Right.
So that's kind of my view. And yeah, this was a really good conversation. Thank you for hosting that. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for dropping by. Specs, final thought.
Yeah, my final thoughts. I would say if I was doing this debate, I would maybe bring up the data, but I would also talk about how a lot of right-wing movements, especially fascism, which is by definition a right-wing ideology, glorifies and necessitates some sort of violence and violent aspects such as militarism and expansionism. I would go to the roots of that. No, it's not just right-wingers commit violence. It's a lot of right-wing ideology glorifies the military, which is sort of a glorification of violence, because it doesn't glorify like individual members or like remembers individual members. It glorifies the military as an idea, especially the violence carried out by the military. I would talk about that. That would be my position, and I'd also talk about modern day right-wing violence as well, because obviously, and from other countries as well. I'd talk about that. Like, yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you for having me, and I'm going to go.
All right,
have a good one, everyone. Thanks for watching, everyone.
I think that I was kind of disappointed on this debate. It went to nowhere conversations, and we didn't get much of the data, both citing stuff without even showing it. That was so triggering, like, fuck you both. And I had the exact same criticism of both at the same time, which is kind of funny. Now, there's so many arguments that give you the result that the right is more violent just on its face. Look at South America. The US sponsored a bunch of coup d'etats and disappeared people and so on. In the South, bombarded Chile, and there's so much that has happened when it comes to right violence that even if you have pockets of left violence, modern, like today, actual violence from the left, I don't see a way that you can catch up. Even considering, the Chinese Revolution and the things in the USSR and so on, the right have a bunch of other people that were very adept at doing what they did, which was make humans not breathe anymore. So it's a hard discussion unless you agree to the terms of like, okay, what do we allow and how do we compare and so on. But the debate itself was boring as fuck. So hopefully the next one is better. But I don't expect it to be better because this is the exact same thing inspiring philosophy does. It just misquote studies, piling fallacies of tone and concept on top of each other. And we never get to actually examine the data, so that is always boring. But tomorrow we will have that interview. Rusted Soul is a promise. We're talking with it and a little bit of other stuff. But oh my god, I'm so excited for tomorrow. She and I bonded, guys. It's going to be funny as hell. All right, people. I don't know if Isa has come back yet, but we'll check. Isa, are you there? 5, 4, 3, 2. No, he's not. So with that, we're going to be on our way. But before we do that, make sure to do the social thing is like, share, subscribe, send this to a friend, send this to your significant other, go to the corner, yes, the corner of your street, and yet subscribe to Sherba Mate Talks. Miraculously, we're already at 910 subs. We're 90 away from 1,000, which is our next goal. So a lot more yelling, and we'll get there in no time.
Well, I want to say
Ivan,
that. Oh, sorry,
yes.
I didn't interrupt, but I would say that
no, go ahead.
on one sense, it's miraculous in that it's great, but it's also not miraculous in that it's directly a consequence of the high quality talks that you have here and hosting this platform and being consistent and all those things are super hard. So,
oh yeah,
appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I want to be humble. Like I learned from Witsit. Mr. Ivan, where will there be a word salad buffet? Yeah, she likes to go after Witsit because of the grifting of the community. So we're going to put a lot of attention in that. So thank you, everyone. We'll catch you tomorrow. The video is already up, so make sure to let it know that you want to see it by clicking the button that says notify me. And we'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Have a great night.